It stood as fearless, unrepentant, and hilariously entertaining. A comedy series so magnificently ridiculous that it achieved legendary status despite producing merely 12 installments. Fawlty Towers did more than challenge conventions. It ridiculed them, trampled over them, and subsequently stumbled across them with deliberate satisfaction. Yet within all the pandemonium, a specific sequence violated an unspoken boundary, one that would remain permanently transgressed. What precisely occurred in that notorious segment that triggered the program's subtle vanishing? Continue watching as we reveal the sequence that caused Fawlty Towers to collapse spectacularly. Number 1. The actual lodging nightmare that inspired a comedy masterpiece. The plan involved nothing more than finding temporary accommodation. No extravagance required, simply acceptable lodging in a tranquil coastal community. The calendar showed 1970, and members of the Monty Python ensemble had arrived in Torquay for flying circus production. However, their discovery extended beyond mere sleeping arrangements. Will next week work out definitely, Lord? That should be pleasant, correct? We've anticipated that ball roughly as long as Hadrian waited. No, wait, Hadrian himself. The experience proved surreal, practically absurd instruction in hotel mismanagement. For John Cleese, this became the conception point for among British television's most celebrated catastrophes, Basil Fawlty. Picture this scenario. Following an exhausting journey, you enter a hotel anticipating relaxation. Rather than comfort, you encounter someone so mistrustful and antagonistic, you question whether hidden cameras are recording. Donald Sinclair embodied this reality, the actual manager of Gleneagles Hotel, who remarkably merged suspicion with customer relations. His behavior transcended simple discourtesy, reaching theatrical unpredictability. He regarded patrons as trespassers and scrutinized their actions constantly, as if everyone harbored malicious intentions toward him. A particular incident left the Python members absolutely bewildered. Eric Idle had temporarily placed his briefcase in the entrance area. Rather than employing common sense by politely inquiring about ownership, Sinclair jumped to the worst conclusion. Without pausing, he seized the bag and hurled it beyond a garden boundary, convinced it contained explosives. Hardly a hospitable greeting, and definitely not standard security protocol for hospitality professionals. That incident wasn't unique. When Terry Gilliam employed his utensils incorrectly, Sinclair rushed over to rectify his dining etiquette as if improper cutlery usage constituted a serious violation. Guest grievances frequently received outright disdain. Rather than resolving issues, Sinclair compounded them, generating an environment that proved both comically insufferable and genuinely real. John Cleese found himself simultaneously confused and entertained. Here stood someone so extraordinarily unsuited for his profession, so accidentally absurd, that Cleese observed him with a comedian's fascination. Something peculiarly magnificent existed within Sinclair's catastrophic approach to hospitality. Cleese documented his observations, actual written notes. Subsequently collaborating with co-writer and spouse Connie Booth, he transformed all that insanity into a character destined for television immortality. Basil Fawlty, the comically incompetent hotel proprietor anchoring Fawlty Towers, is originated not from imagination but from this peculiar actuality. Cleese amplified the eccentricities naturally. Basil's outbursts, his continuous passive-aggressive remarks, and his catastrophic stress management were intensified for comedic purposes. Yet Basil's essence, his mistrust, interpersonal clumsiness, and aptitude for offending everybody derived directly from Sinclair. The program itself operated for merely 12 installments spanning 1975 through 1979. Registration requires my signature initially. Double marking. Certainly it qualifies. It's substantial. Yet it established an impression few comedies accomplish. Every chaotic miscommunication, every collapse behind the front desk honored that perplexing Torquay encounter. Paradoxically, Sinclair never completely understood his inspirational role. He died in 1981, seemingly oblivious that his misguided administrative approach had been preserved in British comedy. While Fawlty Towers attained legendary recognition, the authentic origin narrative remains stranger and more amusing than invention. It wasn't constructed within a writer's workspace from nothing. It commenced with an accidental meeting in a community nobody anticipated remembering, within a hotel nobody expected discussing. The individual who sparked everything he believed he operated efficiently when actually he captained customer service's equivalent of the Titanic. For John Cleese, though, this represented merely the commencement. Prior to Fawlty Towers, before Basil emerged, and before recognition arrived, how precisely did his journey originate? Continue watching to discover the complete narrative. Number 2. From disorder to Cambridge, John Cleese's formation. Well before Monty Python mayhem and Basil Fawlty's hospitality catastrophes, John Cleese navigated the peaceful seaside community of Weston-super-Mare. He represented the sole offspring of Reginald Cleese, an insurance representative harboring distaste for the ancestral surname Cheese. Considering it excessively ridiculous for military personnel, Reginald officially exchanged Cheese for Cleese in 1923, a choice that would subsequently complement his son's distinctive comic heritage. Throughout school, Cleese towered above fellow students quite literally. By 13, he exceeded 6 feet height, his lanky build attracting attention before his cleverness ever did. Yet beneath the awkward stature and school attire, something else developed. His preliminary education at St. Peter's Preparatory School, financed by family inheritance, cultivated 2 fundamental elements: affection for language and keen perception of human conduct. He wasn't merely a bright student excelling in cricket and boxing. He already examined life's absurdities, though unconsciously. The classroom proved insufficient for containing his inquisitiveness. A statue prank during Clifton College attendance foreshadowed the humor Cleese would eventually perfect. Understated visual and curiously intellectual. He painted footprints departing from a Field Marshal Haig statue as though it had wandered toward the restroom. Adolescent mischief, possibly, yet. Even then, it represented storytelling through comedy. Not every moment proved humorous, though. When Cleese discovered at 17 that despite academic achievement, he'd been overlooked for house prefect appointment, it created lasting impact. According to his own account, it altered his perspective on fairness and dignity, something that would resonate within the satirical viewpoint through which he subsequently examined authority figures and establishments. With university positions under strain due to national service conclusion, Cleese needed to postpone his Cambridge aspirations. Instead, he returned to his former preparatory school, not as pupil but as instructor of Latin, science, English, and history. Ironically, the Latin instruction he once provided would surface in Life of Brian, where Cleese's character famously corrects anti-Roman graffiti grammar. Every unusual detour along his path somehow contributed to his creative resources. Eventually, he secured his position at Downing College, Cambridge, pursuing legal studies. But destiny had alternative intentions. At a student exhibition, the Footlights Theater Club inquired whether he could sing or dance. Negative Cleese stated flatly, adding that if anything surpassed his dancing inadequacy, it was his singing. "What can you do?" they questioned. "I provoke laughter." That statement quite literally represented his entrance opportunity. At Footlights, Cleese connected with future partners, Tim Brooke Taylor, Bill Oddie, and the one who would change everything, Graham Chapman. Collectively, they commenced crafting the variety of peculiar intellectual and anarchic comedy that would proceed to reshape British television. Even following graduation with a legal degree in 1963, Cleese's father persistently forwarded newspaper advertisements for retail management positions just in case this comedy endeavor didn't succeed. One question persists, though. How did this academically talented prank-executing schoolboy evolve into a comedic force before Fawlty Towers ever premiered? Continue watching to uncover the complete story. Number 3, Fawlty Towers, a magnificent chaos of brilliance and marriage. If you ever questioned how a hotel operated by someone teetering toward insanity became among the most cherished sitcoms in British history, it wasn't because John Cleese experienced a solitary flash of genius. Rather, it originated with a marriage not one destined for longevity, but one that generated creative enchantment. Cleese and his then-spouse, Connie Booth, transformed a real-life encounter so absurdly catastrophic it remained with them for years into something unforgettable. Everything commenced during a notorious visit to Glen Eagles Hotel in Torquay, where Cleese encountered the hotel administrator so absurdly discourteous and incompetent it approached satire. Most individuals would simply post negative feedback, but Cleese and Booth perceived something different. Comedic treasure. The concept of a short-tempered hotel proprietor entangled in chaos refused to disappear. Soon, Fawlty Towers seeds were planted. Rather than merely creating a program about a cranky innkeeper, the pair sharpened every moment with intelligence, bewilderment, and characters so extreme they somehow felt authentic. When the program initially premiered on BBC in 1975, it didn't precisely captivate critics. One labeled it catastrophic, perplexed by its rapid humor and absurd scenarios. But the audience they comprehended. Viewers immediately connected with Basil Fawlty's frantic energy, Cleese's towering bundle of anxiety and rage, alongside sharp-tongued Sybil, consistently grounded Polly, and unfortunate, helpless Manuel, who converted every misunderstanding into explosive disaster. What distinguished the program wasn't just slapstick chaos, but elaborate timing and farcical tension throughout every sequence. Each installment represented a powder keg of bewilderment, pride, and barely controlled hysteria. Paradoxically, for something so beloved, the BBC nearly canceled after just 6 installments. However, reruns and expanding word of mouth made executives reconsider. By 1979, 4 years following the initial season, a second and concluding batch of episodes were premiered. Only 12 installments were ever produced, yet those dozen entries secured the program's position in television history. Behind the scenes, the narrative proved less cheerful. By filming commencement for the second series, Cleese and Booth were already divorced. Still, they continued as creative collaborators, determined to complete what they initiated. It marked the final time they would collaborate, but their concluding performance was anything except bitter. Together, they concluded Fawlty Towers with distinction, their artistic chemistry unbroken even if their marriage wasn't. Even presently, decades afterward, the program's humor feels contemporary. It's referenced, analyzed, and still watched by new generations who cannot resist laughing at Basil's escalating fury or Manuel's innocent bewilderment. Fawlty Towers demonstrated that chaos, especially the variety born from two people converting disaster into comedy, can prove timeless. Somehow, through that combination of awkward hospitality, frayed nerves, and pure farce, Cleese and Booth managed to provide the world a sitcom that never departed. Number 4. The enduring brilliance of Fawlty Towers. Though merely 12 installments were ever produced, Fawlty Towers established a legacy substantially larger than its modest duration. This is where its enchantment refuses to diminish. When Fawlty Towers premiered in 1975, television critics responded more perplexed than pleased. Some dismissed the program as chaotic and incoherent, unable to comprehend that the mayhem was precisely intentional. But while critics hesitated, audiences engaged completely. They didn't just understand it, they couldn't get sufficient of it. Something almost painfully relatable existed in watching Basil Fawlty fumble through each day, convinced he controlled situations while the universe clearly had other plans. John Cleese's portrayal of Basil wasn't merely funny. It was a masterclass in barely suppressed rage and misplaced ambition. Basil wasn't malicious or cruel intentionally. He was simply confined in a refinement fantasy he could never quite achieve. That internal tension, his frantic desire to impress upper-class patrons while being fundamentally incapable of concealing his own snobbery, transformed each episode into a ticking time bomb. But the genuine brilliance of Fawlty Towers wasn't in the explosions. It was in how it made every collapse feel simultaneously absurd and strangely tragic. Basil wasn't suffering alone. His sharp-tongued spouse, Sybil, portrayed to perfection by Prunella Scales, knew precisely how to deflate his ego with a single statement. Polly, the sensible maid, portrayed by Connie Booth, often seemed to be the solitary adult in the establishment. Then there was Manuel, the hapless, eager-to-please server, portrayed by Andrew Sachs, whose constant bewilderment made every situation more unmanageable and every punchline more explosive. None of it was tidy, and that was intentional. The hotel's catastrophes weren't isolated jokes. They were extensions of Basil's internal chaos. Beneath the slapstick, the program explored themes of class, insecurity, and human foolishness. Basil wanted desperately to operate a respectable establishment, to be taken seriously, to rise above his station. But the harder he attempted, the more everything collapsed. Yet that chaos was meticulously constructed. Each installment, though filled with chaos, was tightly written and perfectly timed. The jokes didn't just succeed, they ricocheted. The pacing was relentless, the energy unstoppable. It was comedy that demanded attention and rewarded it generously. Still, despite its brilliance, Fawlty Towers was a gamble. After airing just 6 installments, the BBC wasn't convinced it merited continuation. It wasn't until reruns began attracting larger and more devoted audiences that the network approved a second and final series in 1979. In total, only 12 installments were made. But in that small number, Cleese and Booth captured lightning in a bottle. Over time, critics reversed course. What was once seen as a failure became a gold standard. In 2000, the British Film Institute named it the greatest British television series of all time. Today, nearly half a century later, Fawlty Towers remains among the most quoted, adored, and referenced sitcoms in history. Though it was built on miscommunication, mishaps, and mounting tension, its legacy is clear. Some catastrophes are too excellent to clean up. But what made one episode out of just 12 explode into infamy? Why does it still spark debate decades later? Continue watching to find out. Number 5. Fawlty Towers in the turbulence of controversy. But even at the peak of its success, laughter didn't protect Fawlty Towers from controversy. One particular episode pushed the boundary between comedy and offense, so far it almost destroyed the program. It was titled The Germans, and from the very beginning it was chaos wrapped in satire. Viewers initially saw Basil Fawlty portrayed with perfect absurdity by John Cleese stumbling through his hotel responsibilities after sustaining a nasty head injury. Now, Basil was already a catastrophe waiting to happen on ordinary days, but with a concussion. What followed was a tornado of missteps, awkward encounters, and one of the most infamous punchlines in British television history. The trouble commenced when a group of German tourists checked into the hotel. Basil, barely coherent and desperate not to offend them, issued a firm instruction to his staff, don't mention the war. But true to his character within moments, he was doing exactly that and far worse. In his rambling attempt to play host, Basil spiraled into a surreal, fast-talking tirade full of Second World War references, Nazi comparisons, and then, as if things couldn't get more uncomfortable, a full goose-step march through the lobby with an over-the-top imitation of Adolf Hitler. It was outrageous. It was completely excessive. And for some, it was just too much. British viewers were divided. Many couldn't stop laughing, recognizing that the actual target of the joke wasn't the Germans. It was Basil himself. His ignorance, his arrogance, and his total lack of self-awareness were always at the heart of the show's humor. In this case, the war jokes weren't glorifying anything. They were making Basil look like a fool. That was the point. But others, including BBC executives, didn't see it that way. Letters flooded in. Critics accused the program of making light of a dark and painful history. Some called it tasteless. A few even demanded the episode be removed permanently. And while the BBC didn't ban it outright, the backlash was serious enough that network officials considered shelving the episode for good. In the end, they let it stay. But only after a long and heated internal debate. Across the channel, the response in Germany was somewhat more complex. Some German viewers understood the satire and appreciated how the episode mocked British attitudes rather than them. They laughed at Basil's foolishness and saw the ridiculousness for what it was. But others didn't find it funny at all. For those with family members who had lived through the war, or worse, died in it, the slapstick portrayal of Hitler and the awkward war jokes felt insensitive and painful. Decades later, the arguments surrounding the Germans have only grown louder. In the age of streaming and global access, older comedies are being re-examined in a new light. Scenes once seen as edgy or ironic are now judged by contemporary standards where political correctness and cultural sensitivity matter more than ever. And the Germans didn't escape this wave of re-evaluation. Several streaming platforms removed the episode entirely, while others edited out specific scenes or lines they deemed offensive. This sparked a whole new controversy. Loyal fans were furious. To them, the edits were a form of censorship that misunderstood the program's purpose. They argued that Fawlty Towers was never about punching down. It was about exposing the flaws in people like Basil, who never realized they were the joke. Even John Cleese never wanted to back down from a fight stepped in. He defended the episode passionately, reminding everyone that satire isn't always meant to be comfortable. In his view, Basil Fawlty was the perfect example of how ignorance and arrogance often go hand in hand, and mocking that was necessary even if it made some people squirm. The war jokes weren't aimed at Germans, Cleese insisted. They were aimed at the British obsession with the war and at Basil's stupidity. He wasn't wrong. Basil was never a hero. He was petty, snobbish, rude, and often completely clueless. What made him funny was that he never got away with it. His plans always backfired. His attempts at control always collapsed. And in The Germans, his effort to avoid offending his guests turned into one of the most spectacular displays of foot-and-mouth comedy ever broadcast. Still, it's easy to see why the episode struck such a nerve. Comedy, after all, walks a fine line. What one person sees as satire, another might see as cruelty. And when the subject matter is as heavy as World War II, the stakes are even higher. Yet despite the outrage the Germans endured, not only did it remain one of the most memorable episodes of Fawlty Towers, but it also helped secure the show's place in television history. It proved that even the most beloved comedies aren't immune to criticism, and that sometimes the boldest jokes are the ones people remember the longest, whether they laugh or not. Today, Basil's frantic cry of "Don't mention the war" is etched into British pop culture. It's been parodied, quoted, and debated for generations. And while some networks may try to sanitize it for modern audiences, the original version still lives on both as a piece of comedy brilliance and a reminder that humor often comes with consequences. The conversation around the Germans hasn't faded. If anything, it's become a case study in how comedy evolves and how the same scene can be viewed in two completely different ways, depending on who's watching and when. But maybe that's the real legacy of Fawlty Towers. It didn't just make people laugh, it made them talk. It challenged assumptions, exposed ignorance, and showed that sometimes the most ridiculous characters can teach us something if we're paying attention. And no matter where you stand on the episode, one thing is clear. Fawlty Towers never played it safe. It poked, it prodded, and it pushed boundaries. In doing so, it carved out a legacy that's still being discussed and dissected decades later. Number 6. Behind-the-scenes cast of conflicts and collaborations. Fawlty Towers was chaos bottled up and broadcast to the world. But what happened off-screen was just as wild as what fans saw on it. The slapstick humor, razor-sharp dialogue, and frantic energy that made the series unforgettable didn't just appear out of thin air. It came from a cast and crew who poured everything, sometimes quite literally, into every scene, even as personal struggles simmered behind the laughter. The show's masterminds, John Cleese and Connie Booth, didn't just co-create the series. They were also its emotional core. Cleese portrayed the permanently stressed Basil Fawlty, and Booth portrayed Polly, the calm in the storm. But by the time they began working on the second season in 1978, their marriage had quietly ended. It wasn't a dramatic breakup splashed across tabloids, just the quiet heartbreak of two creative minds who had grown apart. Still, they carried on like professionals, not just tolerating each other, but working in lockstep to produce some of the program's finest installments. You'd never guess watching Basil and Polly bicker and brainstorm that the real-life couple behind them had just separated. As the camera rolled, there was no room for personal baggage. Even when the pressure mounted, the cast never let it seep into their performances. Prunella Scales, who portrayed the fearsome Sybil Fawlty, was a master of turning upper-middle-class sternness into comedic gold. In real life, she was nothing like her character. Kind, thoughtful, and admired across the British acting world. She once shared that Sybil was inspired by women she'd observed who could command a room with just a raised eyebrow and a sharp voice. Her transformation into the commanding hotel co-owner was so complete that even Cleese admitted Sybil's shrill Basil was enough to put the fear of God into him on screen at least. And then there was Andrew Sachs, whose portrayal of the ever-confused Manuel made him a household name. But behind the lovable foreign waiter was a man who gave everything, sometimes too much, for his art. In one memorable scene, Basil hits Manuel with a frying pan. What most viewers didn't know was that the first take used a real pan, leaving Sachs with a nasty bruise. After that, they switched to a rubber one, but the damage was done both literally and symbolically. Sachs also suffered minor burns during a fire scene gone wrong, yet he never once complained. With a smile and a shrug, he returned to the set again and again, turning Manuel into one of the most beloved and physically abused characters in sitcom history. Still, no amount of personal strife or physical mishaps could dull the brilliance of the program. The set might have been filled with awkward silences, ice packs, and private heartaches. But when the cameras rolled, the magic returned. The chemistry among the cast remained electric proof that sometimes the best comedy comes from those willing to laugh through the pain. That strange mixture of tension and teamwork created something timeless. As new generations discover Fawlty Towers, they're greeted not just by brilliant writing and unforgettable performances, but by the quiet, often unseen sacrifices that made it all possible. It's easy to get caught up in the laughter and forget the call, but perhaps that's part of the program's genius. Beneath the shouting, the pratfalls, and the burned breakfast was a cast that showed up, gave their all, and left behind a legacy that still stands strong, rubber frying pans and all. But what happens when the man behind the chaos refuses to fade quietly and dares to reopen the hotel doors once more? Keep watching. Number 7, Beyond the Laughs. What became of the Fawlty Towers? Cast still riding the wave of chaos that made Fawlty Towers a masterpiece of British comedy, what followed for its beloved cast proved just as surprising and often more dramatic than anything scripted on the program. At the heart of it all was John Cleese, the brilliant mind behind the eternally stressed Basil Fawlty. After the program wrapped, Cleese didn't just move on, he expanded his comedic empire. From co-writing and starring in A Fish Called Wanda in 1988 to lending his iconic voice to animated blockbusters like Shrek 2 as King Harold Cleese stayed everywhere you looked. But age hasn't dulled his bite. Even in his 80s, Cleese remains outspoken, unafraid to challenge modern comedy cancel culture, and anything else he feels deserves a verbal jab. In 2023, he made headlines again by announcing an ambitious reboot of Fawlty Towers, this time co-writing it with his real-life daughter, Camilla Cleese. The revival, set for release in 2024, promises to bring Basil's grumpy genius into the modern age, though not everyone's convinced it's a good idea. Meanwhile, Connie Booth, who portrayed the calm, resourceful Polly and co-wrote the original series with Cleese, her then-husband, chose a completely different path. After Fawlty Towers, Booth quietly stepped away from the spotlight and pursued a career in psychotherapy. No press tours, no fan events, just a clean break from the chaos of entertainment. Her decision surprised many, especially given how central she was to the program's brilliance. But it's clear she found peace where Basil never could. Prunella Scales, unforgettable as the razor-tongued Sybil Fawlty, proved equally enduring. She went on to appear in celebrated films like Howard's End in 1992 and numerous television dramas. Though her performances stayed sharp, real life eventually dealt her a cruel hand. In recent years, Scales has been battling vascular dementia. Her husband, fellow actor Timothy West, has spoken tenderly about her fading memory, but also her enduring wit. Even as time steals parts of her past, the warmth she shared with fans continues to shine through. For Andrew Sachs, the lovable yet endlessly tormented Manuel Fawlty Towers marked both a high point and a physically demanding chapter. Sachs suffered real injuries on set, including a nasty bruise from a frying pan and burns from a kitchen scene gone wrong, but he never let it show. His dedication made Manuel one of British television's most cherished characters. Sachs continued to act in popular series like Coronation Street and in Doctor Who, before sadly passing away in 2016 after his own battle with dementia. Some cast members like Ballard Berkeley, who portrayed the doddering Major Gowan, left their mark early. Berkeley's portrayal of the eccentric ex-military man full of outdated views and unexpected zingers wouldn't pass today's filters. But that's precisely what made the character so memorable. Berkeley passed in 1908, leaving behind a legacy that has outlasted the political correctness of changing times. Brian Hall brought flair and a bit of kitchen anarchy as Terry the chef, though he appeared in fewer episodes. After Fawlty Towers, he kept working in television and film until his passing in '97. Similarly, Jilly Flower and Renee Roberts, the elderly pair, Miss Tibbs and Miss Gatsby, proved how even smaller roles can steal hearts. The two actresses continued acting well into their later years before Flower's death in 2009 and Roberts's in 2010. Their quirky affection for Basil added a layer of charm to the already chaotic hotel. As for the future of Fawlty Towers, the planned 2024 reboot has sparked debate. Can a program so deeply rooted in 1970s humor survive the modern world's sensitivities? That's the gamble John Cleese seems eager to take. But whether the revival flourishes or flops, the original remains untouched lightning in a bottle that defined a genre. Its magic wasn't just in the jokes, but in the passion of a cast who gave everything they had both on screen and beyond the curtain. But what do you think? Can the quirky brilliance and sharp humor of Fawlty Towers still thrive in today's ultra-sensitive world? Or is this reboot a recipe for disaster? We'd like to hear your take, so don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.